Hello, and thanks so much for joining us for this meeting of the minds and panel discussion for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, because we are all, after all, trying to be cyber smart, as this month's hashtag goes. I'm Kara Parfit, Director of Vendor and Product Management for Cerdant and Logically, and overall super fan of all things cybersecurity. And joining me today are an amazing group of well-seasoned security and IT industry veterans, but also just three of my favorite people. So that helps. That makes it an even better day. So in no particular order, I'd love to start by introducing the group we have here. And starting with Logically CTO and K&R Network Solutions founder, Jeremy Kurth. Thanks for joining us, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me, Kara.
Jeremy, you started K&R in 2002. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep, right here in San Diego. So
you've seen the evolution of lots of things, as well as, you know, your own company merging to become an even bigger national MSP known as Logically now.
Exactly. Yep. And we're welcome to have the Cerdant family with us. So excited.
Yeah, we are very excited as well. And I'll just note that in 2002, you were starting a business, and I was just really into Blink 182 there.
They went to my high school. Interesting fact. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Even better. All right. Next, thrilled to have VP of Platform Architecture from SonicWall here, and all-around security industry thought leader, Dmitry Arapatov. Thank you for joining us again, Dmitry. I'm not sure exactly how many times it's been at this point, but I'm sure we probably owe you a blazer or something, like Saturday Night Live gives their 5-time host, right? We probably owe you something.
How about a beer next time we meet?
A beer, yeah, we can do beer.
That'll be wonderful.
We can do beer. And I know we've talked about this before, but for the sake of our new audience members, you've been at SonicWall since 2008. Is that correct?
2005.
2005. I dipped you 3 years.
I was an engineer, product management. So it's been 16 years at SonicWall.
So you've seen many things as well. And last but certainly not least, we have Cerdant CTO and lover of learning and professional development, Josh Steen. Now, Josh, you've held just about every technical position there has been to hold at Cerdant, correct? Including some that never existed, right?
That is correct. I think even on my LinkedIn profile, it shows that I know how to fix a Keurig coffee machine. So I've done about everything you can imagine here at Cerdant.
You're a resetter of fuse boxes for when we lose electricity and the refrigerator dethaws or the freezer dethaws, right?
Yes, that has happened several times. So that should be on my LinkedIn profile too.
Yeah, a new meaning to wear as many hats, right?
Yep.
Okay, gang, let's get started. So just to establish what our goal is today is to make sure our attendees and viewers walk away with a solid sense of the state of cybersecurity as it exists today, as well as some actionable intel to help keep their organization safe. I think we should all be pretty clear on that. So we're going to focus in 3 key areas. One, we're going to start with major trends of 2021. We'd love to know what you're seeing as industry experts, as well as some predictions for what you see coming ahead. Want to talk about how organizations are combating the threats, or how you see the most effective way to combat the threats from a technology versus process standpoint. And then last but not least, prioritizing the tactics based on the recommendations you've made today and based on individual businesses. So Josh, I will start with you. Major trends of 2021, but not just the major trends that stick out to you most, but what major trend is keeping you up at night?
Yeah, so from a trend perspective, I'll start there and then I'll go into what keeps me up at night. But from a trend that I'm seeing, I think that most of us see out there in the world right now in cybersecurity, we've been facing it for years and really don't know how we solve the problem. Is like there's just a gigantic talent shortage right now. If you go to cyberseek.org, they have a great heat map that's out there that I like to keep a track of. And I think I looked at this morning. There's about 462,000 open positions in the U.S. alone. And that's good and that's bad. That means there's a lot of job opportunities for people, right? There's a lot of job opportunities for people to make career changes and have some growth in their career. It's really bad for people like us that try to hire cybersecurity professionals. I know that Jeremy feels my pain when it comes to that. we have very talented people that do a lot of great things. And it's really hard to find those people right now. And you can buy products. I can go buy a product any day. I can go buy a next gen AV, and no offense, Dimitri, I can go buy a SonicWall any day if I want to, but I can't just go down the street and find a person that's a cybersecurity expert. That's really hard to do. And that scares me a lot. What's keeping me up at night is, again, the technology and the bad actors are outpacing the practitioners that we do have, right? So Dimitri at SonicWall, they're able to pump out so much great technology for us to leverage, but it's hard for us to keep up with all this new technology, to know all the bells and whistles and how to flip the switches and turn the knobs of how these things work. So that really concerns me, that the bad actors are able to overwhelm us, and we're never going to be able to really understand and leverage that technology to its best ability. From a prediction standpoint, I look at it from a data leakage standpoint. I think that with the work from home right now, we're going to continue to see a lot of data leakage in 2022. 60% of companies are finding security gaps because of their people working from home now. They're not able to control everybody as much. Dimitri used to talk about it as the gooey center of a chocolate, chocolate nugget. And I talk about it as being the castle, right? That's gone with everybody being at home right now. So I'm in an office. I know that Dimitri's not, Carrie, you're not, Jeremy, you're not in an office. So that's gone. The lure of everybody being behind our great firewall that's going to protect us, it's just gone. So we have to pivot and find different ways to protect our org. And with people moving to the cloud, again, that opens up opportunities for people, maybe not maliciously, but on accident, they left something open and now I can get to your data. So we're going to see a lot more data leakage, I believe, in 2022.
So I don't want to send us sideways off track already, but Josh and Jeremy, both from a service provider perspective, it's hard to imagine a scenario where, people have been at home for we're sneaking up on 2 years now. How many customer environments do you see at this point that still have not really solved the secure work from home situation, knowing that it's here to stay, for better or worse?
Yeah, so I think I'll field that. I think the question was how many have not solved it, and I would say that depending on the client and their appetite and their preparedness for work from home, I would say that none of them are done. I think that's one of the challenges with security is you truly are never finished. But you do have to start incorporating different techniques, different technologies, different processes to combat the risks of security. The other week we had a client work from home and they were having some issues and finding out that along with their kids, they've got different systems within the same network environment that they're running their corporate data with Roblox downloads and all the lively exploits that can exist within those product suites. So you really have to be able to wrap your mind around what is the new plan, make sure it's comprehensive, but also knowing that many of these home environments, they were set up with very basic out-of-box, pick your ISP, home router. So the answer is none of them are done. But we have had customers reach over to us for different solutions, different approaches to protect them in the right ways.
Well, that's a good point. I think they're never done is a good thing to walk away with. Just whenever you think you're done, you're not done.
Right.
Dimitri, I'll hand it over to you. Trends keeping you up at night. What's on your list?
So one of the major trends that I've seen over the last 9 to 12 months, and I'm going to pick there are many different topics that we can cover, but one that specifically is sticking out to me is the evolution of the techniques that the ransomware groups are using. And I'm sure all of you have read about the Colonial Pipeline, there is a food processor that 2 weeks ago or a week ago, a major food processor that got ransomed in the United States. The fact that it's not national news means that they probably resolved it. But the techniques that the ransomware actors started using have become, I don't even know what to call them, torpedoing. Like we used to have phishing, we had that whaling, now it's like torpedoing, I think. Because what they do is they look for vulnerabilities in software, and they look for vulnerabilities in software and in products that are internet facing. And they literally monitor the vulnerabilities as they're coming out. And we're on record pace this year in the number of vulnerabilities that are critical vulnerabilities that are being reported. And so they've gotten sophisticated where they have penetration testers and they develop or download proof of concept code to exploit those vulnerabilities. So they get in through your unpatched VPN, they get in through your unpatched Exchange, they get in through your unpatched, RDP or whatever else you might set up. We have actually a list of, there's recently a person from another vendor. I want to give him proper credit, from Recorded Future, Alan. He crowdsourced the top vulnerabilities that are being exploited by ransomware groups. And, it's people don't patch them, and not because they're negligent, but because these vulnerabilities come out and it takes time to patch. But the ransomware actors have learned that, and they pounce on this opportunity as soon as they see it. So everything that you've seen in the last 9 months, not everything, well, that's a big statement. Most of what you've seen in the national news in the last 9 months or so has been the result of this type of technique. And that's scary because organizations generally cannot respond, are not geared yet to respond that quickly to vulnerability. So that's a major trend. It will die down, it's probably going to reach a fever pitch and then it'll die down, hopefully quicker rather than later, but we all need to be aware of it. In terms of what keeps me up at night, it's the same topic, Josh, that you and I talked about, I think 5-6 months ago. Is I hate to beat a dead horse, but I want to say supply chain, but not the supply chain what keeps me personally up at night is not the supply chain at the SolarWinds or Kaseya level. It's at the personal tools level. So the way that I will get ransomware one day is by one of my tools and all the utilities that I run and all the little useful utilities that I download from the internet as a techie, one of those getting compromised, and me updating and downloading the update and getting compromised. And by the way, WannaCry 2017, that's exactly how it happened, through a tax software update package in Ukraine that just happened to spread worldwide. The supply chain attack vector is now being exploited by the attackers, even at the code level. Just every few weeks, there's an example of some very popular library in GitHub that's used by thousands and thousands of other organizations, from Microsoft to small mom and pop shops, that, somebody snuck in some code, and that code actually was, doing something bad. There was a crypto exchange that, they lost $2 million because it got siphoned off because they were using one of these libraries that happened to put in some extra code to put in its own crypto wallet in the escrow account instead of the company's escrow account, right? So supply chain attacks are what keeps me up at night. And in terms of the prediction, I'll just riff off on that. Layup, super easy one. In the next 6 months, yet another crypto exchange will get hacked. But in something that was too easy. And what's practical probably for people who are listening is what Josh said, data leaks. The LinkedIn data leak, like 700 million records. If you're on LinkedIn, your data is out there. That's all going to start getting weaponized in either better phishing emails or phishing campaigns, or just the wealth of personal data that exists out there right now through all of the data leaks. Like the horses have left the barn multiple times now. At some point, some enterprising attacker will take that data, compile it, use it, and then start sending very interesting campaigns based on that, which will be a level above the current kind of state of the art that people are used to.
So Dimitri, let me jump in here real quick. Sorry, Kara, but so I think about this too. It's now that we have all of this data out there from a data leaks perspective, and how well deep fakes are. I think about right. This does keep me up at night now. Like, a deep fake is one thing, right? But now you have all of this basically intel on public people at all levels of society. And you have the ability for somebody at home to easily create a deep fake, relatively easily, right? So think about that now. I can take Jeremy's data that I can go find pretty easily on the internet, and nobody please go do this, right? But then I can also take images of him and put this together, and now I have that. Or I can take a voiceover of him doing a webinar, right, and pull apart words, and I can make something very realistic now with very real data, and that's pretty scary when you look at that.
Yeah. Deep fake, I think we discussed that in our last thing. Deep fakes are a more long-term strategic thing that keeps me up at night. And I think it's extremely important for everyone to get inoculated with the information against the fact that I can right now go and create, I don't know, Terminator 2 with my face throughout, as either Terminator or oh my God, I'm blinking out on the main female character's name. Anyway, the point is, but what's on that same topic? I think it's related. The level of effort is right now constrained to nation states. I don't think, but let's combine 3 different data breaches. OPM in 2018, right? Office of Personnel Management. Everybody who applied for clearance, for a security clearance, all of their data got stolen by, we can't really fully tell, but we suspect that it's China. Equifax, that one hits more close to home. If you've ever applied for a credit card, your data is out there. They paid, I think, $50 million fee. Sorry. And LinkedIn, Facebook, you take all that data and the potential for blackmail for highly motivated people like, nation states, to financial fraud, to one of the scariest anecdotes. I heard this actually in 2015 from a high-level security professional who was targeted with a phishing email that knew where the school where his kids were. And the phishing email kind of activated his reptilian brain by saying, hey, we are from this school where your kids are, and there's been an accident, and you need to sign this form for hospital, right? So it's like it's like kids, school, highly accurate information. You're not thinking logically, you're thinking with your reptilian brain. You're double-clicking any attachment, if it's a PDF that's been Trojaned or something like that. And that type of crafting is possible will become more and more possible with this leaked data. Now, this is not just to scare everyone, right? This is just to be aware. You can't do anything about it now. The horses have left the barn. You just have to be aware that this will or may happen.
Right. I want to ask too, not to, again, go too sideways, but I want to go back to ransomware. And also the combination of ransomware and data leaks, because I'm glad you brought up ransomware. And I'd like to ask Josh and Jeremy from the service provider level, because it's something that I obviously see in a lot of the marketing, and it's a lot of what we're talking about with customers. But are you worried that customers are getting ransomware fatigue, or fatigue about hearing how much ransomware is a threat and how much it's growing? And because it is, I mean, honestly, it's one of the biggest things that jumps out at you in the SonicWall mid-year threat reports that just came out. It's staggering and continues to change in many different ways. And this has just turned into the longest asked question as I keep talking. But, Josh, Jeremy, are you worried about customers getting fatigued by hearing about ransomware?
Jeremy, I'll let you go first.
Sure. I think, Kara, to your point, ransomware is just like I view it as one of the objects as it moves through the techniques, right? So these threat actors. So I'll first respond and say what we're seeing now is ransomware is at the end. If a client gets breached, they're commonly for months, if not a year. I've come into situations where it was over 365 days that the threat actor existed, doing all the things that Dimitri just talked about, gathering intel, gathering data, to then leverage that in more sustaining ways. And then when they're done with you, that's when they then ransomware you. So I do think that still is a high threat. I think that it's going to continue to be. To your point around how we educate, and provide security awareness, I do think that people at this point across the universe have heard of ransomware. So I think it's important to say this is one of the methodologies with which a threat actor performs, but continuing that education of the end user and not just speaking to one thing is an important part. And I think cybersecurity awareness and training has to be a part of your culture. It should be, almost inserted into a high school, syllabus at this point, because I think it's that important. And we look at, Dimitri is absolutely right in terms of the vulnerabilities that exist and the lack of resources to address them. But I would put dovetail with that is end users' behavior, using the same passwords for all the different products they use, how they 2FA or don't they. And so, I think ransomware is a fatigue. I think that it's part of the continuous education. And I see that the shift from threat actors, that it used to be just drop the payload of ransomware and move on. In fact, I think they're using it as kind of their exit button, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah,
I would
Josh,
agree.
anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it used to be a lot of smash and grab, right? They were getting in, ransoming it, encrypting, and then they were taking off. And now as our techniques have gotten better, their techniques had to get better. So they know that they can't go in and just smash and grab anymore. So they just lay and wait. Sometimes they get in and they just wait for 2 weeks to see if anybody knows they're there. Once they realize that nobody's there anymore, then they stay for years possibly.
Absolutely, Josh. And I would say the real risk in that is situations, at least here in San Diego, a well-known organization went down through ransomware, but it was obvious that they didn't have the ability to restore, which tells me from a technologist perspective that it wasn't as if it was a smash and grab, right? These individuals that got in, landed the CNC, really had an opportunity to comb the environment and probably hit their backups, their disaster recovery, all the things that they had. And so that is a very scary proposition. So, to your point, it's not a smash and grab job anymore, and they're really going to take advantage and leverage the information that they get within that environment before they really, apply the pain, if you will.
If I may add to this, there is a lot of method to that madness, because everything that you just mentioned that happens for a reason. That they get in, they pivot to establish persistence, because they know if they get ejected from the initial point of compromise, then they have persistence. Then they gather the data, they exfiltrate. That was the prior to this vulnerability stuff. The prior trend was exfiltrate data from the organization to use it as an extortion lever to threaten to trigger regulatory, like, for example, if you're in healthcare or in Europe or do business with Europe and your GDPR is there, the narrative then was, we have you ransomed. Don't try to close anything down because we can get back in. If you try to do anything, the ransom will double. If you don't pay within 48 hours or whatever, 1 week, we will release your data. Here's an example of this data that will then trigger whatever penalties you may have to in your industry, right? So there's a lot of method to that madness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So an actual example of that is no customer names will be given here, but several months ago during a pen test, we actually identified that the CFO's credentials had been compromised. So we relayed that information we're never going to wait to the end of the engagement. Like, that's critical information. We passed that along. We believe those credentials had been compromised for over 3 months. Within 2 days of those credentials being notified to staff that they had been compromised, the network had been ransomed. It was almost like they knew that we knew, and then they just basically ransomed and hit the eject button and got out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we've established that we can spend an entire session on ransomware alone, and we might have to actually circle back around and do that. So I feel like we barely scratched the surface. But Jeremy, I want to give you a chance here from a trend perspective. What's at the top of your list, and then looking into your crystal ball, what do you see coming?
Yeah, and I thought about this question as you're asking, Josh and Dimitri. I think I'll give somewhat of what I call a duh answer. A trend that I think we need to acknowledge and just embrace is that technology will continue to expand. So I think it's fair to say that there used to exist a world where all of my data, all of my applications, all of my identities, all of my stuff lived on a server physical box that I could walk over and see and touch and protect. Cloud and the entire universe that exists with social media, end user devices, it's completely expansive, right? And exponentially. And so I think that trend will not stop. I don't envision a world where all of a sudden we're just going to, evaporate down to a single point again. And I think understanding that should then set the precedence of your security posture has to understand that you're never finished, you're never done, and you need to put this into an operational component of your organization. It's not that I'm going to install my EDR and wash my hands of the concepts of securing my environment. So I'm speaking to a trend, but more so about, okay, what do I do next? And so that's, for me, just understanding that trend is not going to slow down. It's not going to stop. Technology will continue to expand and then get ahead of it as a result. What keeps me up at night, these guys are hitting it right on the head, at least for my role, personally, knowing that there will be a breach tomorrow. It's not going to stop. And that does. Ultimately, we understand the threat actors. We understand our role and responsibilities. But, Dimitri again said with vulnerabilities, for example, even most organizations aren't at a spot in their maturity roadmap to even identify vulnerabilities. Those that are even more scared because they commonly don't have the resources to patch them. So if you look at, say, a hypervisor stack, pick your product, and there's a vulnerability that's released, they commonly don't have the IT resources or the resources or methodologies to then patch it appropriately within a day or two. It could take them months. And so that keeps me up at night, knowing that these vulnerabilities exist. In addition, most organizations don't know they have the vulnerabilities, yet alone the resources to patch them. And it's a two-part problem. My prediction, which I think was kind of the third category, was I've commonly worked with my role at CTO with other C-level individuals who were trying to educate and get an understanding of the risks with not having a cybersecurity plan or an investment. And too often I've heard, and I speak a lot with the small business owners who, I'm a recovering one, having formed logically, where the comment is, well, I'm just the Joe shop down the road. I've got 20, 30, 50 employees. They're not, the cyber people you're talking about aren't worried about me. They're not attacking me. My response is, you're the one that they're looking for. It's those individuals who are not putting forward an effort to protect themselves that are falling into the bucket of compromise. And so I predict that more businesses and more ideology from leadership that does not make this a priority are the ones that are next. And I know that's kind of a hard counterintuitive thing to think about, but those leaders that are saying, no, I don't want to be there and I don't want to be next on the list and are putting effort and actual response and budget and resources behind it are going to distance themselves from those businesses and organizations that are not doing that. And so that's my prediction, is that those that aren't addressing this are going to be next in the news and or just really a really negative impact to their business. It could put a small to medium business out of business, depending on the severity. If you're a local professional service provider like a CPA, you're dependent on referrals, word of mouth, or a financial advisor, and you get breached and your customer portfolios get exposed, I could imagine that your customers would be upset and probably leave, and you might have a real tough time recovering from that.
Jeremy, that last point, I mean, if I could have $1 for every conversation that I've had over the last 10 years where a small business tells me, that, but I can't emphasize how important it is what you just said. And I have a different way of maybe emphasizing it. Cybersecurity right now, being online, is not a game of non-participation.
Correct.
And what that means is, if you use a computer, if you use email for your business, if you keep any digital records, if you're that CPA and you send tax return or collect the information or store it in digital form, you are part of the game. This is not a game of non-participation, because on the internet, you might be a small 10-person business, but you might actually be a neighbor to Microsoft or to a 500-person business or to a 1,000-person business. An IP address is an IP address. Attackers don't differentiate. They literally have a way of scanning the internet to everybody who's connected. When they send emails, or if you're using an off-the-shelf router, for example, let's call, TP-Link or one of those, right? Go look for how many of those come up every other month with backdoors and pre-configured passwords. I, as an attacker, have a way of searching the internet for those. I don't care who you are, that you're a small CPA in a small town. You're on the internet. I see you, right? And I have a script to attack you. So I cannot emphasize how important that last point that you made is.
Well, I'll take the accolades. It's not mine alone. This is years and years of telling businesses to be relevant with your investments. If you're operating as a $3, $5, $10 million business, you're not going to have the budget of, say, one of the bigger shops. Completely understood. But that's when you do have to sit down and prioritize and be relevant. So the other thing quickly to add that I've heard and seen businesses fall into the trap of is, well, I don't have any data on my servers. Everything's in the cloud. Therefore, I don't need protection. You don't understand how attacks occur. It does not matter what system you're logging into or where it exists. If you have a computer that you are connecting to sensitive data, you're at risk. And trying to educate individuals that just because your SQL data or your financial data no longer exists or sits on a physical server in your office does not mean that you then have carte blanche just to do whatever you want and not protect your systems. And I see a lot of organizations falling into that trap. Hey, the data is no longer on my computer or my server, therefore I don't have to, take proactive measures. So I wanted to kind of add that sprinkle in there of a prediction. I think businesses who take that mentality of, all my stuff's in the cloud, I'm good to go, right? I don't have a server anymore. I don't have any data on there. They will also feel the pains of that decision.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too, whenever I talk to small businesses like that, it's hard to get that point across. I know, Jeremy, you've been in those conversations where they're just blank face or they're telling you it's not that big of a deal, but 60% of small businesses that suffer a breach close their doors within inside of 60 days of suffering said breach. So do you want to play the odds, right? And then I can say, well, 96% of all businesses in the United States are an SMB business. So you just start doing playing the percentages. It's like you need to start paying attention and trying to do the right thing. Now, what I will say is this year in 2021, I've had more positive conversations with SMB businesses. Yeah. That really goes back to your original question, Kara, that we're now probably 25 minutes away from. But I don't think that businesses are tired of talking about ransomware. I firmly believe now, this year, I've had more positive conversations with people that say, I know I need to take this seriously. What do I need to do? More so than ever. So I think that maybe we finally beat it into them that they need to take this seriously.
Agreed.
Well, good news. Good news all around there then. All right, let's move on to phase 2 here, or round 2. So all of this being said, you've got the constant topic of product over process, or not necessarily over the other, but knowing that you can't just throw money at these things, but you have to throw money at some things, and knowing what a balance it is really of product versus process is how, what bubbles up top of mind, product versus process. And, we're not talking brands, we're talking tactics and solutions here that are part of overall stacks. So, Dimitri, I'll kick it to you to start off with. What's your balance of product over process?
Okay, you're asking a product guy, but even as a
I know it's
guy,
not fair. You're probably the most unbiased product guy I have ever experienced. So.
What a layup of a question.
I know.
Yeah, right. That didn't look.
Kara, I'll send you Venmo after this.
If that didn't look like a plant to start with the product guy, I don't know what does. Whose idea was it? Was my idea for Dimitri?
Yeah, Dimitri, just pull up Sonical's website. Let's just go down.
Actually, what I was gonna say is, even as a product guy, I was looking for an apt analogy of how much of an interplay it is between process and product. I wish I could tell you, buy this product and all your problems will go away, right? And, I was thinking of an analogy of, it might be a bad analogy. You can go, your roof is leaking, you might go buy shingles, but if you don't install those shingles and do it properly, it doesn't matter that they're sitting in your garage or if you just dump them on the roof and don't put them in the proper place, it doesn't matter. So it's all an interplay. There are, and I only say this because I have so many conversations where people are like, so if I buy your product, my problems go away. And I'm like, I don't want to tell you that, because what that does is it helps you. If you deploy it properly, then they go away. But like, if you just turn it on and go walk away, no, you're not done, right? It's a tool. You have to use the tool properly. But anyway, to the trend that I mentioned earlier, let me be concrete. I mentioned this vulnerability trend, right? And the thing is, there is an easy low-hanging fruit to help mitigate, not solve, but help mitigate that problem that virtually everyone has in their arsenal. Any sophisticated business has in their arsenal. And that is turn on intrusion prevention. Just make sure that your intrusion prevention is turned on, because what that does is for example, as a vendor, that we have a threat research team that's constantly monitoring for these vulnerabilities. It's their day job. All they're doing is monitoring, looking for new vulnerabilities. And when they find something new, they create a piece of intelligence that we push out to all of our products. So if Microsoft today has a new vulnerability in Exchange, we within 24 hours roll out protection via intrusion prevention, for example, to that vulnerability. So if you have that vulnerable Exchange server behind this, you now have a window of opportunity, like your window to patch has now grown. You're not like, if that attack comes in from the internet, we'll block it at the gateway. That's a very specific, case to the specific problem that I posed earlier. But I'll also tell you another thing, like as a vendor who doesn't even sell multi-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. Like, Jeremy, you were talking about those customers in the cloud. When I talk to those customers, what I tell them is like, oh, great. So your least security conscious person, employees, username and password is now the firewall. So all I have to do is I have to fish the credentials of your least security conscious individual who's going to trade, for a $20 gift certificate, their car, their mother's maiden name, and the high school they went to, and the mascot, or whatever else, right? And I'm in. Thank you very much. You made it very, very easy for me, right? So now we don't sell multi-factor authentication. All of our products that are gateways and all that stuff have multi-factor authentication, and we'll continue beating this point home. But that's on the product side. In terms of process, like, you have to get towards, there are two things that I'll highlight. Segment, right? Submarines have segments for a reason. Segment off. And Jeremy, again, I like what you said earlier, like, assume that you're going to get breached. Just the mentality should be you're going to get something. Don't assume that you're going to prevent it. Do a role play. Pick a person in your company and pretend that person just got a virus, ransomware, virus, etc. They got a virus. That's a known fact now. How screwed are you? Like, I'll put it bluntly, right? Just do that scenario playing. Like, if that person walks in and their computer is blown up, how badly screwed is your whole company now potentially exposed? Because remember, viruses, they scan the net, they spread, right? And why do they spread? Because they want to establish persistence. They look for other vulnerable systems, etc. How contained is that breach, right? So that's the segmentation conversation. And the other thing is attack surface mapping. It's more about, like, do you even know that you have a server that's vulnerable? Like, if I tell you, again, another scenario play, if I tell you right now, Citrix version blah, blah, blah has a critical vulnerability where I am sitting from home. If I just send the right packet to your network, which I can find on Shodan, I'm into your company. Does this affect you? Yes or no? Do you even know where your servers are? Do you know if they're internet facing? Like, what is your asset inventory? What is your surface to the internet, right? If you don't know that answer, you don't even know where to begin to start quantifying your risk. So anyway, there are a few low-hanging fruit. I can go on with this like for an hour, right? Every problem has a product solution and a process solution. But these are, just in the interest of time, I'll just throw these two out.
So Dimitri, if it's okay, I'd like to not challenge, but ask you a question, Dimitri, because I agree with you on the IPS stuff. If we look at the supply chain attack, Kaseya, for example, and understanding that was a SQL injection issue with old school DL file. So with intrusion prevention, I think that one of the challenges the market needs to address and understand is SSL, right? I mean, if we aren't able to properly inspect these packets, because they're encrypted, and then let the engines actually do their jobs. And I think that one of the things we need to make sure that technologists are continuously educated on is the increase of SSL TLS traffic, which is intended to protect it, but then also becomes a problem in terms of interpreting that data, for the engines to work. So I didn't want to necessarily put you on the spot per se, but I do understand.
I love that spot.
It's great. I want to.
And I love that spot only because, and I promise Jeremy and I did not collude on this question. Jeremy, send me your Venmo information after this as well, please. Because you just basically hit on one of the major talking points for the last 5 years is you're absolutely right. 70, 60, 80% of the traffic, pick your source of statistics, is encrypted. And if you're not inspecting that encrypted traffic, you might as well just not bother with anything else. And so the key, yes, and there are ways to do SSL decryption in line. Now, in the particular example that I gave right now, where you're protecting your infrastructure and servers, that SSL decryption is super, super easy because you're not breaking anything. It's actually just part of the way that SSL works. For the technical audience, you take the certificate off the server that you're protecting, you load it on the firewall, for example. The firewall becomes the SSL offloader. It terminates SSL connection, inspects all the traffic, sends either the clear text or re-encrypted traffic to the server. The more difficult
for those of you that didn't follow along, have him rewind and just listen to what Dimitri just said multiple times, because you've got to understand SSL offloading to really protect your environment properly. So I didn't mean to cut you off.
No problem.
You just said. it's not being applied out there. So again, I sorry to interrupt.
That's the straightforward case, because again, you're not quote unquote breaking anything. That's all proper operation. The less straightforward and the more challenging scenario is the reverse of that. So you have users who are clicking on things that are browsing through SSL, and how do you ensure that they don't download something encrypted, right? And that's where there is a way to decrypt that as well. You have to deploy security. That's more of a man-in-the-middle attack, or friendly attack in this case. That's a little bit tricky, but there is a way to do that, and there are all these technologies. That's a separate webinar, but there is a way to do that as well. But I guess the bigger point is, yes, you absolutely have to look inside of SSL. There are ways to do it, and if you don't, you're kind of missing 70% of the traffic.
Yeah, so Dimitri, this goes back to what you and I have talked about several times, is trying to get to a good security practice of what is, known as continuous vulnerability scanning, right? Like you can't really do it one time a week or one time a month or once a quarter, right? Like businesses need to get to a place where they're continuously scanning for vulnerabilities. They're getting alerts that at least notify them that they have something potentially on their network. Jeremy, like how do you feel about that method?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen with the pipeline, as well as additional ransomware issues that I've been involved in, these threat actors are leveraging the vulnerabilities that Dimitri is talking about. The most recent exchange, for example, and again, I can speak to a hypervisor where that particular exploit was leveraged to circumvent and go straight in and grab the storage layer. And you talk about a world where, okay, my server data is encrypted. It's a quite different experience when my VMDKs are encrypted at the storage level, or say hypervisor level. So it's a very important topic. I think that especially the SMB market has been completely underserved as it relates to vulnerabilities. And there's, again, I break it up into two simple categories. These are big topics, but the first one is just vulnerability assessments. The understanding that I have a vulnerability and the act of performing that. That's where I think that the market has been underserved. It's a product heavy, process heavy, as well as work from home now introduces a whole nother thing. How do I reach the appliances within that home environment when most of these scanning engines require an agent themselves, a full stand-up of a server appliance or something to that degree? So that assessment side is the market is starved for it. And working with some of our partners, we're constantly seeking a partner that can help us kind of bridge that gap and perform assessments at a more regular basis. To your point, I would love to see a couple times a day. It's becoming the new antivirus definition update type thing, right? With how frequent the vulnerabilities are released. But again, the second part is, okay, now that I know I have these things, I've got to then patch them. And what is your plan there? You want both. You need to do the first, but now you're just going to stay up and drive yourself even crazier because you couldn't get to or solve. So you really need to be looking at this as a two-pronged approach. I need to be applying vulnerability assessment best practices into my organization, period. But then I also need to have a plan, because once you know about it, it's almost, now you're not being a good shepherd if you're not then fixing that vulnerability within a reasonable amount of time. So.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Jeremy, perfect opportunity to roll into your product versus process, or product/process approach. Did you just give that answer or
there's so many answers depending on the question and who's asking the question. But Kara, I think that I love the response of MFA. Like if there was one single prevention that could be deployed that was the lowest hanging fruit as well as the largest deterrent, is to have a solid MFA plan. And it's got to be across the entire spectrum of technology stack, not just the organization, but the personal. So you have to protect the individual. So your own tools that you use, whether you're a social media person, you like to go on XYZ website for leisure, look into and see if that's 2FA enabled. I think that for me, I view MFA as the entry level into, I like the concepts of single sign-on. It's an extremely difficult thing to achieve, is to have your entire organization running through a single sign-on. And the benefits of that is you really just narrow the playing field. So we could basically set up any application or any cloud provider that my organization uses should be, as best as possible, funneled through one entity. Now, one might argue that, well, that exposes you if that one entity is breached, then they have access to all the things. But I think being able to focus on protecting one thing is a lot easier and better versus the alternative of trying to protect all the things. So for me, it's single sign-on, of course, with MFA applied on that product. And I do see and feel that the technology world is kind of headed in that direction as a general theme. And from a process perspective, it's having its day in the sun, this concept and marketing term of zero trust. And I like the process of achieving a state with which you are at the zero trust. And for definition, because it's important to define what that means to me, is the aggregate of practices that have been accumulated since the beginning of IT time. It's the microsegmentations that Dimitri spoke about. It's the limited access and roles and rights within a user account. It's really taking something and saying, what is its minimum requirements to perform its job, and getting rid of all the fat that exists outside of it. So if we're talking about distributed firewall solutions within VMware NSX or AWS, applying the correct and proper VPCs, as well as in Azure. I mean, all of these providers at this point have a software-defined networking product that can achieve or at least get you to microsegmentation, as well as hopefully firewall rules that really bring it down to the individual workload and work stream. But it's not just the networking part, it's also the rights and roles and access that Dimitri spoke about. So I would say a process is to continuously push your organization into that zero trust label. The challenge there is I can't send you a link to download zero trust. It's not like that. It's around setting up all these ecosystems, to operate and behave in those best practice ways. And then the other process I would say is to just understand and embrace the fact that security is protecting your business is never complete, never done. And you have to revisit it. I can't just run, to Josh's point, vulnerability assessments in March of 2021 and then say I'm done, because vulnerabilities exist tomorrow that you didn't perform on the previous scan. So just embracing that process, that this is an iterative part of my maintenance and operations, and it doesn't go away. It's like flossing. You've got to do it every day. Nobody does every day. I've never met anybody who does, but you're supposed to, right? So security should be right there as part of a systematic process of your business. So just like invoicing.
I'll preface this with I have nothing against zero trust. I believe in it, but we in our industry loves our buzzwords and acronyms. Yes. So are you trying to tell me, Jeremy, that I can't buy a piece of hardware or download an application that makes me zero trust?
Dimitri will sell you one and say it does, but no, that's not how it works. No, I joke. Josh, zero trust is the new buzzword. It's a marketing term. I think it's there's pros and cons. Like you have to always, at what cost? I'm glad that that's being put out there because it's really bringing front and center a lot of things that people don't and haven't done as part of their IT best practices. And I would say good security starts with good IT and the concepts of a DMZ and properly understanding what that means and why. Not having your general user accounts or let's say even worse, your internal IT people running around with their actual user accounts with elevated privileges. These are IT basics that have been around from the beginning of IT administration, yet it still happens in today's world. So zero trust, you're right. It is a new marketing term. I'd put it right up there with XDR, the sexy term. These are all meant, though, if you boil them down to the definition of them, it's really about best practices. And so I'm glad you asked the question, but yeah.
I appreciate you giving that response because I feel like it's our duty to educate, the audience. And that is that like, these are processes that we have to put together into a complete package. Like, you can't go someplace and buy a piece of hardware that's going to implement zero trust. So, and a lot of times that's hard for people that are not in the day-to-day to understand that. So I appreciate you calling that out.
And, as a vendor, I get that question a lot, actually. Like, what do you guys have so that I can solve my zero trust problem? And I say, okay, well, I have a tool. I have tools that I can give you that you have to deploy them that gives you zero trust. And I think a lot of the reason why zero trust is having its, day in the sun, as you said, Jeremy, is the work from home and remote work, because what this did is this completely shattered the perimeter. We've been talking about the disappearing perimeter for a decade, but this really drove the point home. And the way that I like to have people picture what zero trust really means is imagine being inside the office. You're back in the office. You're sitting right next to the big server that...
I'll close my eyes for this one, by the way.
Yeah, you're sitting right next to the big server that has the application or the data that you want to access. And you're plugged into the same switch as the server, for example, right? Or like nearby, you're on the same network, and you still can't access it until you authenticate. And there is some element of authentication that checks who you are. Do you have access? Do you have the right endpoint posture? Are you logging in from a corporate provisioned laptop, or are you logging in from a laptop with AV? Are you logging in from a Windows 2000 laptop, right? And then it says, are you even entitled to it? Just because you're physically, you can touch the server doesn't mean that you're entitled to access it, right? So that's a platonic ideal, right? Where we say, what is zero trust? Well, every single resource is only given access to after authentication, endpoint posture check, and you're based on your privileges, and that's it. And if you go back to that analogy that I gave of like, imagine a person in your company getting breached, what do you do now? In this particular case, you say, well, we just revoke their access and that's it. Nobody else, they couldn't touch anything, they couldn't access anything because we're on a zero trust full-on zero architecture. So if you have this in your mind, then you can start thinking about what tools get me there, right? How do I wrap around how do I segment the physical network? How do I wrap around my critical servers, resources, even cloud applications? We're not talking about just physical, but even cloud applications. How do you wrap it all around access tools that will validate the endpoint, that will validate the identity, and will then allow access only after a person passes all those checks?
And I would dare to add to my CTO and dipping into CIO. That's why a CISO exists. Is in it once you're there. So all the things you described that are generally falling into the cybersecurity, IT security realm, there's an aspect of now what? So I've logged in, I've been approved, I've been authorized. I think it extends into the application layer. What can I do within the app? That's also important. If you're not managing that as part of your cybersecurity protocol, of what roles, permissions, and rights do they have in your ERP, and are they the minimum requirements, or am I just applying a standard, group across all of my end users? And so I think it goes further down the rabbit hole as your maturity and roadmap, increases. So yeah, but I love that definition of it. I think you're 100% on point.
Well, Josh, I'm sure you've probably represented your opinion here in some way through the conversation, but I want to make sure that we don't miss anything. So what else do you have on your list?
Yeah,
process.
Yeah, from a product standpoint, like I'll take a little bit different angle at it. Like, I think Jeremy said it before, but we should already assume that we're going to be breached, right? So then what do you do, right? So let's get past the MFA point, because MFA is great. 99% of all credential thefts, with people logging back in could be, gone with if we all leverage MFA across the board. But I look at what I consider the ransomware lifeline, and that is data backup, right? And a lot of people many years ago removed data backup from the security lifecycle. It's not security, so we're going to remove it from our security efficacy. Well, that's not true. It needs to go back because now it's your lifeline. So let's just assume that we're all going to get ransomware. Well, now what do you do? Well, you better make sure that you have good data backups that are secure, they're offsite. You're encrypting those, so you can't get ransomware on that as well. So they should be detached backups. So businesses need to be making sure that they have good data backup in place, and that they're also testing these. I can tell you historically, I have seen many customers that are doing data backup, and I know in the services industry, Jeremy has seen the exact same thing. That, well, we were doing our data backup and we went to restore, but we were backing up the wrong folders, or the data that we were looking for is not there. Like, what do? You don't do anything because you should have looked at this months ago. So make sure that you have a really good data backup practice in place, and that you're also practicing restores and making sure that the data is there and it's the data that you need and that you want.
Yeah, Josh, I don't know if you've ever heard this from me, but whoever coined the term data backup 60 years ago when it first happened should have called it data restore, because it's inclusive of backup and restore. And now people just have taken it to mean only backup. And unfortunately, you're absolutely right. The testing of restores is not given the same priority as backup, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Let me add a funny note on that one. So this goes back to kind of like anything that you do, you should actually test that it works. So Netflix actually released a tool. The way they used to test things in their data center was to randomly turn things off and see if they continue to work. So did engineers, and they actually, if you Google Chaos Monkey, they released a tool that does that on an automated basis. It just turns things off, terminates services, right? And the point is, if you can, and the idea here is that you've got a chaos monkey in your data center. And if you can survive a chaos monkey in your data center, right, that means that you've built resilience and restore and all that stuff correctly.
I think I have a chaos monkey in my family as well. I don't want to go into.
I'm sure somebody was personally inspired when they.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
I would say from a process perspective, Kara, you've heard me talk about this a lot. It's security awareness training. That's near and dear to me, because at the end of the day, people are the cause of like 91% of breaches or incidents in all businesses. Like a person accidentally clicked on a link, a person accidentally, gave up their credentials. Like that happens. So we have to be continuously doing security awareness training. And again, it's not something that you do at the first of the year and then you don't do it for 2 years. It's something that should be baked into your security practice that you're doing for all of these people. That includes practice social engineering, practice phishing with these people, do it monthly, do it quarterly, but you have to keep them in good practice. The other thing that I will add to that is, once you teach them how to identify something, please make sure that you have an incident response plan that tells them now what to do next. Because if I teach you to identify something, but then you don't know who to go to, then you might have accidentally clicked on a link and you realize it. But if you don't know who to go to, then your machine could be compromised. And now we're in a bad state still because you don't know who to go tell. So just make sure that happens as well. So for me, a process that everybody needs to follow. And again, I'm starting to see more people pick this up, more businesses take this as an initiative, but it would be security awareness training.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point from a marriage of product and process, because I think, as we all know, there are quite a few really great, for-profit tools and services out there that help people make security awareness training a lot more manageable. But at the end of the day, it is also free. There are also lots and lots of free resources to add to a robust process as part of any organization's awareness structure. All right, gentlemen, let's roll into round 3 here. So lots to discuss, but really, I think the thing a lot of us are faced with from a question standpoint after all of these conversations happen is, where do I start? How do we even begin to prioritize this massive list of recommendations? So Jeremy, let's start with you. What should someone start with from your perspective?
Great question. And I think that I would like to answer this question that you can do things in parallel, because again, this is not like, by next Saturday, I'm going to be done. Right. And understanding and recognizing that. For me, I work with a lot of individuals who are responsible for not only technology, but for security. And one of the biggest challenges that I feel they face from time and time again is they know the things that they want to fix. They can even articulate to me the things that they want to fix. And they've kind of, especially those that have done their homework and reviewed their environments. So for me, the first start, if you are responsible for IT security and or IT in general, and you're seeking to improve your security posture and really address it, I tend to recommend, and the role that I commonly play, so I'm kind of speaking from my perspective, is ensuring that you have buy-in from leadership. And I'm not talking about, I have to pick a budget number. Many organizations, especially the smaller SMBs that I work with, they're making best decisions for their organizations based on what is available to them. So I feel pretty strongly that if the leadership team is not in alignment, that this is a problem and that this is a risk and that it is something that needs to be addressed, you're going to really struggle to be successful. It's already hard enough. But if you're then not provided either the voice or the reasoning or the attention, you're going to really struggle. And I'm not saying to give up. It's still your duty to improve your security posture. But I will say that you will have a much easier road, as well as be supported by the rest of the organization if you get that buy-in first. So I generally recommend to present that risk properly, associate it to, for example, CEOs responsible for the growth, the health, and the profitability of the organization. I think for a long time, technology was viewed as a negative on the balance sheet. it's a cost. It's like rent. I have to pay for it in order for my people to do things. So it was never looked at as like a revenue generating entity. I think now that has categorically shifted to risk. If you are breached, it could be a lot more expensive to you than losing your top 10 customers. And so understanding that and getting buy-in from leadership, I'm not saying for them to embrace it and like it, but I would strongly suggest that you start there and have those conversations, have the candid ones, have the important ones, because it will just set you on a path for success going forward. And it will get everybody on the same page, right? This is not something that any of us want to do, but it is something that we need to do. Just because it doesn't feel good doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. And so that would be my first recommendation of where to start. I know that the guys are going to speak candidly about, and they're going to throw a bunch of things in terms of what you should enable and configure and get going. But I think Josh is 100% right. If I had to add more things in there, get an IRP, an incident response plan, understand who your team members are. Who am I going to call if I'm breached? Who's responsible for responding? Who are they going to call first? Probably PR and your lawyer. Don't call your IT person. Call those people first. I think the other thing is to start to understand that this is a comprehensive plan. To I think both Dimitri and Josh's point, if they're, I guess Dimitri had stated earlier, if there was one tool I could sell you, and be done, we wouldn't be having webinars and multi-millions of webinars about this topic. So understand that you are creating a comprehensive plan. That plan needs to be revisited frequently, if not quarterly, monthly, or so. I just took some notes while the gentleman was talking. I think the other thing to start with is Dimitri's 1,000% right about asset management. You can't protect what you don't know. It is a huge issue for all customers, for all clients, especially in this ever-changing dynamic. CFO can go and grab an iPad off the table, and all of a sudden, logging into cloud environments, that's a problem for us from the IT side because we don't even know it exists. So strong asset management and processes to back that up. And then my last thing in terms of where to start is the IT basics. Look at what you have that you're not utilizing today. One of the things that sticks out to me is within, and I will cater to the SonicWall team here, outbound GeoIP filtering. Why is that not enabled? I don't know the percentage, guys. I would ask Dimitri if you happen to know this, but I would imagine out of the millions of firewalls that are deployed out there, it's probably an extremely small percentage that have that enabled. And what I'm talking about is the real world experience of commonly infected environments have an outbound connection outside of trusted nations or geographies. That feature is going to be available to you with a click and some administration. Get those things that are basic, out of box, password policies with GPOs. Even in today's age, we still see GPOs not being applied. So start with those things that you have. It's also good news to your leadership. You don't have to spend money on some of these things. It's right there available to you. So, kind of answering you in a 3-tiered response, but that would be my answer to that question, Kara.
Awesome. Josh, why don't you follow that up? What's on your list?
No, I think that's all great. I mean, I think Jeremy even just said it. I mean, you just start, right? I mean, you got to start someplace, right? Because otherwise, I mean, it can become, paralysis analysis, right? Of like, what do? I don't know what to do. And the next thing you know, it's 3 months later and you're still saying, I don't know what to do. And you've never done anything. So like, let's do something. I've written several articles about this here recently, and it's like security on a budget, but what if it was unlimited budget, right? So like low hanging fruit, let's knock out the low hanging fruit. Look at the tools that you already have that you've already paid for. Are you using those to the best of their abilities, right? I mean, any business, no matter how big or small, I think that Dimitri and Jeremy would agree with me on this. Email security. I mean, let's assume that they already have a next gen firewall in place, right? Let's assume that they're rocking a SonicWall. So email security, 85 to 91% of all breaches come through email that comes through, whether that's an attachment or a link that needs to be clicked for somebody to do something, it's coming through email. So let's make sure we have good email security in there as well. We've talked about MFA, next gen AV. I mean, you're looking at next gen AV like an S1 or a Silence that's got a 99.98% efficacy against security attacks. Like you're particularly reducing your scope if you're just you're installing and utilizing applications like this, because they're helping such a broad range of problems that will happen if a user clicks on a link or accidentally installs a file. Then if you want to get into some more of the advanced stuff, again, I think we have to, again, we've talked about this already, but you have to assume that you've already been infected or that you're already going to be breached. So do you have any type of detection in place, right? You have different levels of that. You have EDR, MDR, you have XDR, you have all these different things. Now, what path you're going to take is probably going to depend on your budget, but you really need to start paying attention to what your logs are telling you. Are they throwing alerts? Are they telling you that somebody's already inside of your network? So I believe that a lot of businesses really need to take the next step from a detection standpoint as well. Again, we can't build that castle anymore thinking that we're going to build a castle with really high walls and put archers in the towers and put a moat with a drawbridge. Like, it doesn't matter. Now the bad guy's just going to fly a helicopter over and somebody's going to parachute in, right? So, like, what do we do now? How do we detect that those people are in there? So again, I mean, my best advice to people, because I get this a lot, like, Josh, what should I do? And I just tell them, you got to start. You just have to start someplace, right? Dimitri, what are your thoughts?
Every time this question comes up, I can't help but think of a joke where two guys are in the woods and they run into a bear, and one of them starts tying his shoelaces, and the other one is like, dude, what are you doing? We got to get out. He's like, yeah, I know. I just need to outrun you. I'm tying my shoes to outrun you. And in a way, cybersecurity is sort of the same way. So how can you tie your shoelaces? I think we've talked about MFA. And again, I'm saying this to you as a vendor who doesn't sell MFA, right? It's the number one advice that I'll give my, family, friends, et cetera, who ask me, hey, what can I do better? And Jeremy, you mentioned this, like, do it even on your personal accounts. Like, imagine your Gmail account gets hacked tomorrow. If you steal my Gmail account, you own my life. You can reset every bank password. I mean, it's scary to me, reset your, use MFA there. But honestly, it's like patch, MFA, and then patch. 9 out of 10, 99 out of 100 patches are security patches. They're not feature enhancements. They're real holes. And when people postpone, and I know it's super annoying, postpone an update, and your browser, if you're using Chrome, probably has a red icon in the top right now, right? Just patch. And then we can start going down the list. Non-Windows, non-admin Windows accounts, like users should not be admins. I'm sure certain customers don't have that issue, and then that's on the product side. MFA, patch, IPS, those are super low hanging fruit. And then on the process thing, again, I'll go to a parable where in programming, in software engineering, the typical thing that's told to programmers is don't roll your own crypto. Don't write your own crypto algorithms. You're going to screw up. You can have the most sophisticated crypto math. You're going to mess up on the programming. Trust me, use the already tested, vetted, peer-reviewed libraries off the shelf. And the advice is not as strong in this, but it still is like, if you don't understand the security, if you don't understand the topics that we just talked about, I mean, you have two professionals, depending on the orientation of the screen, right? You have two professionals on the screen, but it's one of those things where security is exciting because it's complicated, it changes all the time, and it's nuanced. If it was easy, it would have been a click of a button. Because it's nuanced, it means that if you miss a certain aspect of the nuance, you just nullified your entire, security practice. And that's why just, have a second set of eyes, double check what you do. Okay. Because this is now the foundation. IT is the foundation of any business that has anything digital. Security is the foundation, is like, I don't know, whatever your analogy is, foundation to the foundation, or the mortar in the foundation, right? You take that out and the whole thing falls apart, basically. So I'll leave it at that.
So Jeremy, you and Dimitri also talked about, and throughout the topics, said aware, right? Like being aware of your assets. Another approach to that I go to a lot of businesses with, because I get the question still, it's like, you just got to start something. Yeah, but where do I start? Well, do you know where your data is at, right? Because and I say that it's funny, but it's like,
it's not a joke.
Can you identify what is your critical data? And if you can do that, then let's start building and isolating a wall around like that. Like that is an important process. Like, let's data back up that. Let's micro segment that. Like that, just start there. But most businesses aren't data aware even. They have no idea what is their data and where it belongs and where it is.
No, Josh, you're absolutely right. I think that, as you bring this up, one of my things to start with, just start creating a list. Open up your good old Excel, Notepad Plus, whatever, and just start creating a list of all the things that make up your organization from a technology perspective. And it brings to bear an example I'll share. Came into a situation with a client. This was several years ago. So they weren't an existing client. They reached out to us for assistance. And what we found was that their online payroll system had been breached. But the unfortunate reality was the IT guy wasn't even aware of it. And it was being managed by, somebody from leadership. And then they left, and then they left. And it was like one of those tribal knowledge turnovers. And then there were dormant accounts still active. And unfortunately for them, they hadn't enabled 2FA on that product, or I don't think it was even available at that time. And so here you are having a legacy user account in a system that IT wasn't even aware of, that was being managed by the financial department. And then there was turnover too quickly and best practices not being followed to decommission those accounts. And bingo, there you are, right? And the IT guy's going, how can I be blamed for something I didn't even know it existed? I wasn't part of the procurement process when the product got brought online. So that asset management and creating that list, to your point, Josh, you brought it up, or I think Dimitri, both of you guys have said it. I'm now doubling down on your ideas. That is an extremely important thing to do. I think the analogy I would give there, like castle moat thing is, look, you can board the third story window and focus on that and really protect the heck out of that. But if your front door is left wide open and unlocked, you're going to have a problem. So having that 360-degree view of everything that you need to solve here. And I think, Dimitri, to your point, Carrie, you asked a question, and I missed an easy lob, softball lob. If you don't feel comfortable, or even if you do, presenting or providing a security plan, too often as a consultant, I do support IT directors and different members that have said the same thing for the last 9 months to their leadership team. It takes them to pay money to somebody to come in and tell them the same thing, and all of a sudden they're behind it. So I think an assessment is never a bad thing, right? I think Dimitri is pointing out that Josh and I and the team around us, we see so many different things. We have a protocol and a process for this. And not whether it's Logically or Cerdant or another trusted provider. Again, I'm provider agnostic. I think oftentimes an IT assessment from somebody that lives, breathes, and is in this is an important thing. There's just a lot of experience that comes with it. And I would add IT assessment plus a security assessment. They are different, but they do and should commingle and converge. And I think that having those at your fingertips, if you feel uncomfortable or you feel that you just need a little bit more information or you need support going into leadership and presenting the true risks, would be maybe a great place to start, to answer your question more succinctly, Kara.
Well, I was going to challenge the three of you to try to agree on a single priority. If you had to start, just pick one place to start. I thought that I heard. We
agree that we won't agree. How about that?
I thought I heard some pretty fair consistency with MFA, and if I had to pick one, I think you would all agree on, I would have picked that. But now I'm not sure with the network inventory question. What do you think? Do you hereby solemnly swear that you agree that you won't agree?
We will not. We've already had this conversation before. We will all disagree. We don't disagree that each other's is very important, but we just all have a different viewpoint of what goes first. And okay. I think honestly, and guys, you tell me if I'm wrong, I think that comes with the type of customer we deal with.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
No, Josh, you're absolutely right, Josh. And I think where we've come to consensus is the importance. We are in 100% agreement with the importance of all of these things, that some situations may themselves to prioritize one over the other, right? And it's important to understand and then respond appropriately. And not every business is the same, and treated the same. So.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. And we come from different world views. And just to illustrate an extreme example, a cloud native, as in cloud only, 30-person business with only laptops and everything in the cloud, MFA, right away. And then we can go down the list and apps, the MFA and endpoint. Whereas a I don't know, 300-person business with on-prem servers that have been installed, that have applications from 15 years ago that have everybody inside, and they have on-prem exchange. There's a whole different set of problems. Like MFA might be nice, but they have much bigger fish to fry, before they get to MFA. So it absolutely depends on who you are, where your data is, to Josh's point, right? And what your kind of attack surface from the internet. Like if I'm an attacker, Dimitri the attacker, my name is easy for this one, right? Dimitri the attacker is scoping out, right? And again, I don't know maybe who you are, but what I do know is that I can scan an IP block, or I might get a database dump of stolen credentials, and some of your employees maybe have used their email addresses from work to sign up to mailing lists or some websites with their work email address, and I now have their work email address. I now have your naming scheme to your domain, like as in, like, do you use first name dot last name or first letter last name? And if I have this big list, maybe I, Dimitri the attacker, I'm sending phishing emails to this list. So the point is, coming back to my point, if you are online, if you have digital business, you are part of the game. And then, like, what is your attack surface? How can Dimitri the attacker get to you, right? And then we start applying all the solutions and all that stuff.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we solved the world's problems today, gentlemen. What do you think? Barely scratched the surface, but I think everyone agrees that the most important thing we can do is keep having these conversations and have them early and have them often, because things are always changing. And like we joked about earlier, but I think people can probably expect a ransomware focused follow-up discussion, because I think we barely scratched the surface on that particular topic. So thank you all for joining for the conversation today. Thank you, Josh, Jeremy, Dimitri, for always a great conversation. And anybody who has follow-up questions, we love follow-up questions. We welcome them. We crave them. Please use any of the methods of contacting us displayed here on the screen, and we will follow up as always. And enjoy hopefully a non-exciting cybersecurity awareness month. Spend all the time you can soaking in this content wherever you can get it from, and be cyber smart. Have a great day.
Thanks, Kara. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Dimitri.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.